The frigid Montana wind howled through the empty streets of St. George as Tabitha Jenkins clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders, one hand protectively resting on her swollen belly. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with the light snowfall as she stood before her father's house, or what used to be her home until 10 minutes ago when he had slammed the door in her face. Disgraceful. Unmarried and with child. You are no longer my daughter. His words still rang in her ears as the December wind of 1879 cut through her woolen dress. Tabitha was 20 years old, alone, and 6 months pregnant in a town that valued reputation above all else. She had nowhere to go. Her mother had died 3 winters past, and her older sister had moved to California with her husband last spring. The child's father, a smooth, talking salesman passing through town, had disappeared at the first mention of her condition, leaving nothing but empty promises behind. Snow began to fall more heavily as Tabitha forced her frozen legs to move. The town of St. George was small but prosperous, nestled in a valley that attracted ranchers, miners, and the occasional entrepreneur. Tonight, though, all the warmly lit windows and smoke-billowing chimneys felt like they belonged to a different world, one she was no longer welcome in. As darkness fell completely, Tabitha made her way toward the church, hoping Pastor Williams might offer shelter for the night, despite her situation. She'd barely made it halfway when her foot caught on an uneven plank in the boardwalk, sending her sprawling forward. She managed to twist her body to protect her belly, landing hard on her side instead. "Whoa there! Are you all right, miss?" A deep voice called out as strong hands helped her to her feet. Through tear-blurred eyes, Tabitha looked up to see a tall figure silhouetted against the light of a nearby lantern. As her vision cleared, she found herself staring into the concerned face of Zachariah Turner, the owner of the Double T ranch that bordered the town. While not a frequent visitor to St. George, everyone knew of the hard-working, serious-minded rancher who'd built one of the territory's most successful cattle operations. "Mr. Turner," she acknowledged, trying to gather her dignity despite her disheveled appearance. "I'm fine, thank you." But the moment she tried to stand properly, pain shot through her ankle and she stumbled again. "You're hurt," he observed, his expression darkening as he noticed her tears and the way she protectively cradled her middle. "And in no condition to be wandering around in this weather." Tabitha couldn't hold back a sob. The events of the day had worn away her resolve, and now this kindness from a virtual stranger was the final blow to her composure. "My father," she began, her voice breaking. "He discovered my condition today. He called me a disgrace and threw me out. I have nowhere to go." Zachariah's jaw tightened as he looked toward the center of town, then back at the young woman shivering before him. In the glow of the street lamp, he could see the desperation in her eyes. "Then you'll be welcome in my home," he said firmly, removing his coat and wrapping it around her shoulders. "No woman with child should be left in the cold, not while I have a roof and fire to share." Tabitha stared at him in disbelief. "You don't understand, Mr. Turner. I'm not married." "The town will talk. Let them," he replied, his voice hard as steel. "I stopped caring about town gossip years ago. Now come along before you catch your death out here." He whistled softly, and a magnificent chestnut horse trotted out from where it had been hitched. In one smooth motion, Zachariah lifted Tabitha onto the saddle, being careful of her condition, then mounted behind her. "But my belongings," she protested weakly. "We'll send for them tomorrow," he assured her, guiding the horse away from town. "Tonight you need warmth and rest." As they rode through the snowy landscape toward the Double T, Tabitha couldn't help but wonder what had possessed this solitary rancher to offer shelter to a ruined woman he barely knew. What she didn't realize was that Zachariah Turner had his own reasons for understanding her plight, reasons buried deep in a past he rarely spoke of. The Double T Ranch house came into view after an hour's ride, a substantial two-story structure of sturdy logs with warm light glowing from several windows. Unlike many bachelor establishments, the place looked well-maintained and inviting. As they approached, the front door swung open and an older woman with silver-streaked hair hurried out onto the porch. "Mr. Turner, we were getting worried with this storm brewing," she called, then stopped short at the sight of Tabitha. "Oh my, Mrs. Hollister, this is Miss Jenkins," Zachariah explained as he carefully helped Tabitha down from the horse. "She needs shelter and care. Would you please prepare the guest room and some hot tea?" The housekeeper recovered quickly from her surprise. "Of course, Mr. Turner. Come along, dear. You look half frozen." Inside, the ranch house was warm and surprisingly comfortable. Practical furnishings were arranged around a large stone fireplace where a cheerful blaze crackled. The smell of fresh bread and stew filled the air, making Tabitha realize she hadn't eaten since morning. Mrs. Hollister fussed over her like a mother hen, settling her in a chair by the fire and removing her wet boots to examine her ankle. "Just a mild sprain," she pronounced. "A day or two of rest should set it right." Zachariah disappeared briefly, returning without his hat and coat. He stood awkwardly for a moment before speaking. "Miss Jenkins, I realize this is unusual, but I want to assure you that you're safe here. My ranch is 15 miles from town, and apart from Mrs. Hollister and a few ranch hands who stay in the bunkhouse, we won't be disturbed." "Why are you doing this?" Tabitha asked quietly. "You don't know me." A shadow passed over his face. "I know enough," he replied. "I know that no child should suffer for choices made before its birth, and no woman should face winter without shelter." He paused. "How far along are you?" 6 months, she answered, her hands instinctively cradling her belly. "You're welcome to stay until the baby comes and after, if you need time to make arrangements." Tabitha was speechless. Such generosity from a stranger was unheard of, especially towards someone in her situation. "I don't know how to thank you." "No need," he said, a hint of a smile softening his weathered features. "Mrs. Hollister has been complaining about having no one to fuss over but me. You'd be doing me a favor." The housekeeper chuckled as she returned with a tray of tea and food. "That's the truth. This one works from sunup to sundown and barely notices if he eats. Having a proper lady in the house will be a blessing." After Tabitha had eaten and her ankle had been wrapped, Mrs. Hollister showed her to a comfortable room on the first floor. Clean linens, a wash basin with warm water, and even a nightgown were provided. "This was Mr. Turner's sister's room when she visited," Mrs. Hollister explained. "She left some things behind that should fit you, even in your condition." "I didn't know Mr. Turner had a sister," Tabitha remarked. A sad expression crossed the housekeeper's face. "Had, dear. She passed on 3 years ago. Influenza took her and her husband both, leaving Mr. Turner to raise their boy." "There's a child here?" Tabitha asked, surprised she hadn't seen any signs of a youngster. "Young Ethan is staying with Mr. Turner's cousin in Helena for schooling during the winter months. He'll be back come spring." Mrs. Hollister patted her hand. "Now rest easy. Things often look brighter in the morning light." Left alone, Tabitha sank onto the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the day's events. That morning, she'd been the respectable daughter of St. George's general store owner. Now she was an outcast, dependent on the charity of a man she barely knew. Yet as she laid down to sleep, for the first time in months, she felt something besides fear and shame. She felt safe. Dawn broke clear and cold over the Double T Ranch. Tabitha woke to sunlight streaming through curtains she didn't recognize. momentarily confused by her surroundings before the previous day's events came flooding back. A gentle knock at the door preceded Mrs. Hollister's entrance, carrying a tray with breakfast and a steaming cup of coffee. "Good morning, Miss Jenkins. I trust you slept well." Tabitha nodded, sitting up against the pillows. "Better than I have in weeks, thank you." "Mr. Turner rode into town at first light," the housekeeper informed her, setting the tray across her lap. "He said to tell you he's collecting your belongings from your father's house." Alarm flashed across Tabitha's face. "Oh no, my father will be furious. He might not even let Mr. Turner in." Mrs. Hollister's expression suggested she had little doubt about Zachariah Turner's ability to handle the situation. "Mr. Turner can be quite persuasive when necessary. Don't you worry." By mid-afternoon, Zachariah returned with 2 trunks strapped to a pack mule. His expression was grim as he carried them into the house. "Your father was reluctant," he explained diplomatically when he found Tabitha reading by the fire. "But I convinced him it was in everyone's best interest to avoid further scandal by allowing me to collect your things quietly." Tabitha could only imagine what kind of convincing had been required. Her father was a proud, stubborn man who rarely backed down. "Was there trouble?" she asked anxiously. Zachariah shrugged. "Nothing worth mentioning, although—" He reached into his coat and pulled out a small, worn book. "Your father didn't want to part with this, but I thought you might want it." Tabitha's hands trembled as she accepted her mother's Bible, tears welling in her eyes. Inside the cover was her family tree, written in her mother's elegant script, the only record of her connection to her family. "How did you know this was important to me?" "I didn't," he admitted. "But it seemed like something that should stay with you." As December progressed into January, Tabitha found herself settling into life at the Double T. Her ankle healed quickly, and though her advancing pregnancy made some tasks difficult, she insisted on contributing to the household. She discovered an unexpected talent for bookkeeping and gradually took over managing the ranch accounts, which Zachariah had been neglecting. "These figures can't be right," she said one evening, looking up from the ledger she'd been reviewing. "According to this, you're selling your cattle for less than market value to the Holloway Company." Zachariah, who had been cleaning his rifle by the fire, looked uncomfortable. "James Holloway gave me my first job when I came to Montana. He's getting on in years now, and times are hard." Tabitha was stunned. "You're deliberately taking a loss to help him." "It's not charity," Zachariah insisted. "It's honoring a debt that can't be repaid with money." That night revealed a side of Zachariah Turner that contradicted his reputation as a hard-headed businessman. Over the weeks that followed, Tabitha discovered more such contradictions. The man who drove his ranch hands relentlessly during Roundup was the same one who stayed up all night with a sick calf. The stern-faced rancher who intimidated merchants in town was also the patient guardian who wrote weekly letters to his nephew. January brought harsh weather that kept them mostly confined to the ranch house. During those long evenings, Tabitha learned snippets of Zachariah's past. He'd come west as a boy of 16, working as a drover until he saved enough for a small parcel of land. Through determination and shrewd trading, he'd built the Double T into one of the most prosperous ranches in the territory. "You've never married?" Tabitha asked one night as they sat by the fire, she knitting baby clothes while he read a newspaper. He looked up, momentarily surprised by the personal question. "Never found the time," he answered after a pause, "or the right woman willing to put up with a stubborn rancher." "I find that hard to believe," she replied. "Half the unmarried women in St. George sigh when you ride through town." A rare smile crossed his face. "Is that so? And here I thought they were holding their breath until the dusty cowboy passed by." Their laughter filled the warm room, and something shifted between them, a comfortable familiarity that made Tabitha both grateful and uneasy. She was acutely aware of her vulnerability, not just as an unwed mother-to-be, but as a woman growing increasingly attached to a man who had only offered shelter out of kindness. February arrived with a thaw that turned the ranch roads to mud and brought the first signs of calving season. Zachariah spent long hours in the barn and pastures, often returning to the house exhausted and mud-splattered. One such evening, he found Tabitha waiting up for him with hot coffee and stew kept warm by the fire. "You shouldn't have waited," he said, gratefully accepting the food. "It's past midnight. I couldn't sleep," she admitted. Her back had been aching all day, a reminder that her own time was growing closer. "Besides, Mrs. Hollister said you missed supper again." He glanced toward the housekeeper's closed door. "She worries too much." "She cares about you," Tabitha corrected. "As do others." Their eyes met over the rim of his coffee cup, and neither spoke for a long moment. Zachariah broke the silence first. "I received word from Helena today. Ethan's school term ends in 3 weeks. He'll be returning to the ranch." "Oh." Tabitha's hand went protectively to her stomach. "I should make arrangements to leave before then. A 10-year-old boy shouldn't be exposed to my situation." Zachariah set down his cup with more force than necessary. "Ethan lost his parents at 7. He understands more about life's hardships than most grown men. He won't judge you. But you don't have to leave, Tabitha." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent an unexpected warmth through her. "This house is big enough for all of us." The unspoken question hung between them: what would happen after her child was born? Would she stay on as the ranch's bookkeeper? Would townsfolk assume the child was Zachariah's? The implications were enormous for both of them. "People will talk," she said softly, echoing her words from the night they met. "People always talk," he replied, just as he had then. "The question is whether we let their words matter more than what's right." Before Tabitha could respond, a commotion erupted outside, shouting and the sound of horses approaching fast. Zachariah was on his feet instantly, reaching for his rifle. "Stay inside," he ordered, moving to the window to peer out into the darkness. A pounding at the door followed. "Turner." "Open up. We need your help." Relief crossed Zachariah's face as he recognized the voice of his foreman. He opened the door to reveal a group of rain-soaked cowboys. "What's happened, Davis?" "Rustlers hit the north pasture," the foreman reported breathlessly. "Took a dozen head at least. We tracked them to the ridge but lost the trail in this weather." Zachariah's expression hardened. "Saddle fresh horses. We'll pick up the trail at first light." He turned to Tabitha. "I have to go." She nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. Cattle rustling threatened not just the ranch's profits but its very survival. "Be careful," she said simply. For 3 days, Tabitha waited anxiously for news. Mrs. Hollister tried to keep her distracted with preparations for the baby, but both women jumped at every sound that might herald Zachariah's return. When he finally rode in, leading a string of recovered cattle and flanked by his weary men, Tabitha rushed out onto the porch despite the light rain. "Thank God you're safe," she called, unable to hide her relief. Zachariah dismounted slowly, and as he came into the light, Tabitha gasped. A crude bandage was wrapped around his left arm, dark with dried blood. "It's nothing," he assured her, seeing her distress. "Just a graze." But once inside, when Mrs. Hollister unwrapped the wound to clean it properly, Tabitha saw that a bullet had carved a deep furrow across his upper arm. She insisted on helping with the treatment, her fingers gentle as she applied salve and fresh bandages. "You could have been killed," she whispered, fighting tears. "But I wasn't," he replied, his hand catching hers as she finished tying the bandage. "And we recovered most of the cattle. Did you catch the rustlers?" A grim satisfaction crossed his face. "Two are in the sheriff's custody in Helena. One won't be troubling anyone again." The matter-of-fact way he delivered this news reminded Tabitha that beneath Zachariah's quiet exterior was a man shaped by the harsh realities of frontier life, a man who would kill to protect what was his. That night, after Mrs. Hollister had retired and the house was quiet, Tabitha found Zachariah still awake, staring into the dying fire. "You should rest," she admonished gently. "Your arm needs time to heal." He looked up at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "I kept thinking about you," he admitted. "Out there, tracking those men, I kept thinking I had to get back to make sure you and the baby were safe." The simple honesty of his words moved her deeply. Without thinking, she reached out to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw where several days' growth of beard roughened his skin. "I was afraid you wouldn't come back," she confessed. He caught her hand and pressed it to his lips in a gesture so tender it brought tears to her eyes. "I will always come back to you, Tabitha, as long as you want me to." The moment hung between them, heavy with meaning and possibility. Then the baby kicked strongly enough for Zachariah to feel it against his arm, and reality intruded once more. Tabitha pulled back slightly, suddenly aware of the impropriety. She was still carrying another man's child, still dependent on Zachariah's charity. Whatever feelings were developing between them, they couldn't be addressed until her situation was resolved. "I should go to bed," she said softly. "Tomorrow will be busy if we're preparing for Ethan's return." Zachariah nodded, understanding her reticence. "Good night, Tabitha." "Good night, Zachariah." It was the first time she'd used his given name, and the sound of it lingered in the room long after she'd gone. March brought milder weather and the impending arrival of Ethan from Helena. Tabitha grew increasingly nervous about meeting the boy, despite Zachariah's assurances that his nephew would accept her presence. The day before Ethan's scheduled return, Tabitha was helping Mrs. Hollister prepare his room when a sharp pain seized her lower back. She gasped, grabbing the bedpost for support. "Miss Jenkins." Mrs. Hollister was at her side immediately. "What is it?" "Just a twinge," Tabitha said, attempting to smile. "The baby's been restless today." But an hour later, another pain struck, stronger than the first. By evening, there was no denying what was happening. The baby was coming, nearly a month earlier than expected. Mrs. Hollister took charge immediately, sending a ranch hand to fetch the midwife from the nearby settlement while she prepared the necessary items. Zachariah paced the hall outside Tabitha's room, his face drawn with concern. "Is it too early?" he asked when Mrs. Hollister emerged to get more hot water. "Will they be all right? Plenty of babies come a bit early and thrive," the housekeeper assured him. "Miss Jenkins is young and strong. Try not to worry." But as the hours passed and Tabitha's cries grew more frequent, Zachariah's worry only increased. When the midwife finally arrived, she shooed him away from the door. "Men are no use at times like these," she declared. "Go tend your cattle, Mr. Turner. We'll call you when there's news." Dawn was breaking when Mrs. Hollister found him in the barn, mechanically checking tack that didn't need checking. "It's a boy," she announced, her face weary but smiling. "Small but with a good set of lungs on him, and Miss Jenkins is tired but well." Relief washed over Zachariah like a physical force. "Can I see them?" Mrs. Hollister nodded. "She's asking for you." He found Tabitha propped up against pillows, her face pale but radiant as she cradled a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. She looked up when he entered, a mixture of exhaustion and joy in her eyes. "Zachariah, meet Thomas," she said softly, tilting the bundle so he could see the small, red face of the newborn. Thomas Zachariah Jenkins. Surprise and emotion flickered across his face at the choice of middle name. "He's perfect," he said, his voice rough with feeling. "Just like his mother." Impulsively, he leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "You did well, Tabitha." The tender moment was interrupted by the sound of hooves and a young voice calling outside. Ethan had arrived, a day earlier than expected. "I should go greet him," Zachariah said reluctantly. "Are you up to meeting him today, or shall I explain you need rest?" Tabitha adjusted her shawl and smoothed her hair. "I'd like to meet him. Please bring him in when he's settled." An hour later, a dark-haired boy with serious eyes stood hesitantly in the doorway of Tabitha's room, looking from his uncle to the woman in the bed with the baby. "Ethan, this is Miss Jenkins and her son Thomas," Zachariah introduced them. "They'll be staying with us for a while." The boy stepped forward, curiosity replacing uncertainty. "Uncle Zach says you do the books better than he ever did," he offered as an introduction. Tabitha smiled. "Your uncle is too modest. He built this ranch with hard work and smart decisions." "Can I see the baby?" Ethan asked, inching closer to the bed. When Tabitha lifted the blanket to reveal Thomas's sleeping face, Ethan's expression softened with wonder. "He's so small. Was I that small when I was born?" "Even smaller," Zachariah chuckled, resting a hand on his nephew's shoulder. "But you grew strong, just as Thomas will." The natural way Ethan accepted Tabitha and her child eased one of her greatest concerns. If a 10-year-old boy could look past her circumstances to see just a mother and baby who needed shelter, perhaps others could too. The weeks following Thomas's birth were a whirlwind of adjustment. Tabitha was determined not to be an invalid, resuming light duties as soon as she was able. Zachariah, however, was equally determined that she shouldn't overtax herself. "The accounts can wait another day," he insisted one afternoon, finding her at the desk with Thomas asleep in a cradle beside her. "You're still recovering." "I've never been one for idleness," she protested. "Besides, spring roundup is coming, and these ledgers need updating before your men start moving cattle." Their stubborn standoff might have continued, but Thomas chose that moment to wake and demand attention. Zachariah reached the cradle first, scooping up the fussing infant with surprising confidence. "I've got him," he said, cradling Thomas against his broad chest. "You finish what you're doing, but then you rest. That's not a request, Miss Jenkins." The sight of the rugged rancher holding her son with such tenderness stirred emotions Tabitha wasn't ready to examine too closely. Thomas, for his part, seemed perfectly content in Zachariah's arms, his cries subsiding to curious coos. "He likes you," she observed. "Smart boy," Zachariah replied with a wink that sent an unexpected flutter through Tabitha's heart. As spring advanced, the ranch grew busier. Roundup brought additional hands to the double T, and the bunkhouse overflowed with cowboys. Tabitha kept to the main house, aware that her presence raised eyebrows among the new arrivals. One evening, as she sat on the porch watching the sunset while Thomas nursed, she overheard two cowboys talking as they walked from the barn. "Taken up with some fallen woman and her bastard," one was saying. "Never thought Turner would be the type." "Watch your mouth," the second man replied sharply. "That's the boss's woman you're talking about." "Wife or not, it ain't right," the first persisted. "A decent man doesn't take another man's leavings." Before the second cowboy could respond, a third figure materialized from the shadows. Zachariah, his expression thunderous. "Adams," he addressed the first man, his voice deadly quiet. "Pack your things. You'll find your pay with the cook." "I want you off my land by morning," the cowboy paled. Mr. Turner, I didn't mean every man deserves one warning, Zachariah cut him off. That was yours. There won't be a second. As the chastened men hurried away, Zachariah noticed Tabitha on the porch. The anger drained from his face, replaced by concern. You heard, he said, climbing the steps to join her. She nodded, adjusting her shawl to cover Thomas more completely. You shouldn't have fired him. People will always talk. Not on my ranch, they won't. His jaw was set in a stubborn line. I won't have my family disrespected. The word family hung in the air between them. Was that what they had become? A family cobbled together by circumstance and compassion. Zachariah, Tabitha began hesitantly. I've been thinking about what happens next. Thomas and I can't impose on your generosity forever. His expression closed like a shutter. You're not imposing. I thought I'd made that clear. You have, but she struggled to articulate her concerns. People are already assuming things about us, about our relationship. It's not fair to you. Let me worry about what's fair to me, he said firmly. Unless. Do you want to leave, Tabitha? The directness of his question caught her off guard. Did she want to leave? The Double T had become more of a home to her in a few months than her father's house had been in years. And Zachariah, her feelings for him had grown deeper than gratitude, more complex than friendship. No, she admitted softly, but I need to stand on my own feet eventually, for Thomas's sake, if not my own. Zachariah seemed to consider her words carefully. I understand, he said finally. But there's no rush. Wait until after summer at least. By then, Thomas will be stronger for traveling if you still want to go. It wasn't quite the response she'd hoped for, but it gave her time to figure out her own heart, and perhaps to understand Zachariah's true feelings as well. April brought gentle rains and wildflowers blooming across the prairie. Thomas thrived, gaining weight and developing a sunny disposition that charmed everyone on the ranch, especially Ethan, who appointed himself the baby's unofficial protector. One fresh spring morning, Tabitha was hanging laundry while Thomas napped in his cradle nearby. She looked up to see Zachariah riding in from the east pasture, a sight that still caused her heart to skip, despite her best efforts at practicality. He dismounted smoothly and crossed to where she stood, removing his hat as he approached. Beautiful day, he commented, looking not at the blue sky but at her. Tabitha felt a blush rise to her cheeks. The sun had brought out freckles across her nose, and her hands were rough from work, yet Zachariah looked at her as if she were wearing the finest silk instead of a simple cotton dress. It is, she agreed, pinning up one of Thomas's tiny shirts. How are the new calves doing? Growing almost as fast as this young man, he replied, peering into the cradle where Thomas slept. His expression softened as it always did around the baby. Tabitha, I've been thinking about what you said about standing on your own. Her hands stilled on the laundry. Yes. The mercantile in town is for sale. Old man Peterson is moving to Oregon to live with his daughter. He hesitated, then plunged ahead. I thought you might consider running it. You have a head for figures, and the store comes with living quarters above. Tabitha was stunned by the suggestion. But I couldn't possibly afford to buy a business. I would provide the capital, he explained. You would manage it and we could split the profits. It would give you independence without taking you and Thomas too far from. He trailed off, then finished, from the ranch. The offer was generous, perhaps too generous. It would allow her to support herself and her son while maintaining a connection to the Double T and to Zachariah. But it also felt like he was trying to establish her elsewhere, to create a respectable distance between them. That's very thoughtful, she said carefully. But wouldn't people talk even more if you set me up in business? People who matter know the truth that you're a capable woman who deserves a chance. His eyes held hers steadily. Think about it. There's no rush to decide. Before she could respond, a rider appeared on the road leading to the ranch the local doctor, judging by the black bag tied to his saddle. "Doc Williams," Zachariah greeted him with surprise. "What brings you out this way? No one sent for you." The doctor, a graying man with kind eyes, dismounted stiffly. "No, but I thought I'd check on your house guest and the little one. News travels even to my office." His gaze shifted to Tabitha. "Miss Jenkins, I believe. I delivered you 21 years ago, though I doubt you remember." Tabitha felt a rush of gratitude for this unexpected kindness, a connection to her past that wasn't tainted by rejection. "It's good of you to come, Doctor. Thomas and I are both well, but I'd welcome your professional opinion." While Dr. Williams examined Thomas and pronounced him healthy, Zachariah excused himself to tend to ranch matters. When the doctor finished with the baby, he turned his attention to Tabitha. "And how are you faring, my dear, physically and otherwise?" His gentle inquiry opened a floodgate. Tabitha found herself confiding the whole story: her father's rejection, Zachariah's rescue, her uncertain future. "You found yourself a good man there," the doctor observed when she'd finished, "though I suspect neither of you has admitted how things truly stand between you." Tabitha looked away. "Mr. Turner has been kind, nothing more." "Kindness doesn't make a man look at a woman the way he looks at you," Dr. Williams said shrewdly. "I've known Zachariah Turner since he first came to this territory, a hard-working boy with old eyes. This is the first time I've seen him truly care about something besides that ranch and his nephew." His words stirred a hope Tabitha had been trying to suppress. Even if that were true, there's still Thomas to consider. He's not Zachariah's responsibility. "I've delivered babies for 25 years, the doctor replied, closing his bag. "And I've learned that family isn't always about blood. It's about who stays when everyone else walks away." He patted her hand. "Think on that, Miss Jenkins." After the doctor left, Tabitha sat for a long time in the rocking chair by the window, Thomas sleeping peacefully in her arms as she considered her options. The mercantile would provide security and respectability, but it would also mean leaving the double T, leaving Zachariah, except for occasional business dealings. Was that what she wanted? Was that what he wanted? The question haunted her for days as spring ripened toward summer. Zachariah didn't press for an answer about the mercantile, but she caught him watching her sometimes with an intensity that made her wonder what he was really offering: a business proposition, or something more. June arrived with its long, golden evenings. On one such evening, as twilight painted the sky in shades of violet and amber, Zachariah suggested they take Thomas for his first proper outing beyond the immediate ranch yard. "There's a spot by the creek where the fireflies gather," he explained, helping her into the buggy he'd readied. "I thought the little man might enjoy the show." Thomas, now 3 months old and fascinated by everything, was bundled snugly against the evening chill. Zachariah drove them along a winding path through a meadow lush with summer grasses until they reached a small clearing by a gently flowing creek. The setting was idyllic: ancient cottonwoods providing shelter, the creek's soft murmur a natural lullaby, and as darkness fell, the promised fireflies began to appear, twinkling like earthbound stars. "It's magical," Tabitha breathed, holding Thomas so he could see the lights dancing among the trees. The baby's eyes widened with wonder. "My sister used to bring Ethan here when he was small," Zachariah said, his voice soft with remembrance. "She believed every child should know there's magic in the world, even in the hardest places." "She sounds wonderful." "She was." He smiled at the memory. "Strong-willed like someone else I know. She would have liked you." They sat in companionable silence, watching the fireflies and the first stars appearing in the deepening blue above. Thomas eventually dozed off, his tiny hand curled trustingly around one of Zachariah's fingers. "He knows who cares for him," Tabitha observed. "Babies have an instinct for such things." Zachariah looked down at the sleeping infant, then up at Tabitha, his expression unguarded in the gathering darkness. "Tabitha, there's something I need to say." Her pulse quickened at his tone. "Yes. I haven't been entirely honest about my motives for helping you." He shifted slightly to face her more directly, careful not to disturb Thomas. "When I found you that night in the snow, I saw something of myself in your situation. Not the same circumstances, but the same abandonment." "I don't understand." He took a deep breath. "My mother wasn't married when she had me. My father was a married man passing through on business like Thomas's father, I suppose. When her family discovered her condition, they cast her out." His jaw tightened at the memory. "She might have died in the winter cold if not for a rancher who took pity on her, gave her shelter, eventually married her and raised me as his own." Tabitha was stunned by this revelation. "You never mentioned. It's not something I advertise," he acknowledged. "But I wanted you to know why I couldn't leave you in the street that night, why I understand what you're facing. So when you offered me shelter, it was repaying a debt to this man who helped your mother." A flicker of hurt crossed his face. "At first, perhaps. But Tabitha—" He hesitated, then continued with quiet intensity. "These past months, watching you with Thomas, seeing your strength and grace in impossible circumstances, it's become so much more than that." The admission hung in the air between them, weighted with significance. Tabitha's heart raced as she realized what he might be saying. "More," she echoed softly. Zachariah reached out to brush a strand of hair from her face, his touch feather light. "I love you, Tabitha Jenkins. I love Thomas too, as if he were my own blood. I don't want you to take the mercantile. I want you to stay at the Double T not as my housekeeper or my business partner, but as my wife." The world seemed to still around them as his words sank in. Fireflies danced, the creek murmured, and Thomas slept peacefully, unaware that his future hung in the balance of this moment. "Zachariah," Tabitha began, her voice trembling with emotion. "Are you certain? There would be talk. People might think, let them think what they will," he interrupted firmly. "I know what I feel. I know what I want. The question is, what do you want, Tabitha?" What did she want? The answer rose clear and undeniable in her heart. "I want a home where my son can grow up loved and respected. I want work that matters. I want," her voice caught, "I want you, Zachariah. I've been falling in love with you since that first night, though I told myself it was just gratitude." His face transformed with joy, and he drew her carefully into his arms, mindful of the sleeping baby between them. "Then say yes," he whispered against her hair. "Say you'll be my wife." "Yes," she breathed, tears of happiness spilling down her cheeks. "Yes, I'll marry you." When they returned to the ranch house that night, they found Mrs. Hollister and Ethan waiting up for them, concern evident in their expressions. "You were gone so long," the housekeeper fussed. "We were beginning to worry." Zachariah and Tabitha exchanged a look, then he cleared his throat. "We have an announcement. I've asked Miss Jenkins to be my wife, and she has accepted." Mrs. Hollister's face split into a wide smile. "Well, it's about time. I was wondering how long it would take you two to see what's been plain to everyone else for months." Ethan's reaction was more pragmatic. "Does this mean Thomas will be my cousin now?" he asked, considering the implications. "More like a brother," Zachariah explained, resting a hand on the boy's shoulder. "And Miss Jenkins, Tabitha, will be your aunt. We'll be a proper family, all of us together." The boy thought about this for a moment, then nodded his approval. "I've always wanted a brother." They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the ranch, with Dr. Williams reading the vows and Mrs. Hollister serving as witness. Ethan held Thomas throughout the ceremony, the baby dressed in a special outfit Mrs. Hollister had sewn for the occasion. Word of the marriage spread quickly through the territory. Some disapproved, viewing Zachariah's choice as scandalous. Others, who knew the couple and had witnessed their growing attachment, saw only a family finding its way against difficult odds. Tabitha's father remained unyielding in his rejection. Refusing the wedding invitation Zachariah insisted on sending. The absence pained Tabitha, but the joy of her new life helped heal the wound of his abandonment. By summer's end, the double T had settled into a new rhythm. Tabitha managed the household accounts and correspondence while caring for Thomas, who thrived under the love of his extended family. Ethan divided his time between ranch chores and playing Big Brother, a role he took very seriously. And Zachariah, the once solitary rancher, found himself surrounded by the family he'd never dared hope for, his days full of purpose and his nights filled with the warmth of Tabitha beside him. One evening in late September, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Thomas sleeping in his cradle nearby and Ethan reading a book on the steps, Tabitha looked at her husband with a smile that held a secret. "What is it?" he asked, catching her expression. "You've had that look all day." She took his hand and placed it gently on her stomach. "Dr. Williams confirmed it yesterday. We're going to have a baby, Zachariah, next spring." His face registered shock, then wonder, and finally a joy so profound it brought tears to Tabitha's eyes. "A baby," he repeated, as if testing the reality of the words. Our baby," she confirmed. "Thomas will have a brother or sister, and this child will have your name from birth." Zachariah pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "For what?" "For stumbling into my life that snowy night, for bringing Thomas to us, for loving me enough to start again." Tabitha leaned into his embrace, thinking of the journey that had brought them here, from despair to hope, from rejection to acceptance, from solitude to family. "I should be thanking you," she murmured. "You were the only one who saw me at my lowest and still believed I had value." He tilted her face up to his eyes reflecting the last golden light of day. "I saw you," he agreed simply, "and I'll keep seeing you every day for the rest of our lives." As the sun sank below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land that was now truly home, Tabitha felt a sense of completion that transcended all the hardships that had come before. The child she carried was a promise of a future built on love rather than convention, on choices made from strength rather than fear. Winter would come again, as it always did on the Montana plain. But this time, Tabitha would face it not as an outcast seeking shelter, but as the heart of a home she had helped create, a home where every child was welcomed, where every storm could be weathered together, where love was the foundation that nothing could shake. The Double T Ranch, once a place of solitary industry, had become a sanctuary of second chances. And as night fell gently over the land, stars appearing one by one in the vast Montana sky, Tabitha Jenkins Turner knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. When spring arrived the following year, it brought with it not just new calves and green pastures, but a daughter for Zachariah and Tabitha, a strong, healthy girl with her father's dark hair and her mother's determined spirit. They named her Hope, for all that had been restored to them and for all that lay ahead. Thomas, now walking and babbling his first words, regarded his little sister with solemn curiosity that soon blossomed into protective affection. Ethan, approaching his 12th birthday, took his role as eldest sibling seriously, regaling both babies with stories of ranch life and promising to teach them to ride as soon as they were old enough. And so the seasons turned at the Double T, each one bringing new joys and challenges to the family that had found each other against all odds. The ranch prospered, its reputation growing under Zachariah's steady hand and Tabitha's shrewd management. In time, word reached them that Tabitha's father had fallen ill. Despite the years of estrangement, she went to him, taking Thomas in hope to meet the grandfather who had rejected them. The reconciliation was not easy, but it was begun, another wound slowly healing in the light of understanding and forgiveness. Years passed, the children grew, and the Double T expanded, becoming not just a successful cattle operation but a gathering place for those in need of a fresh start. Zachariah and Tabitha never forgot how their own story began, and their door remained open to those facing hardship, just as Zachariah's had been open to a desperate young woman on a snowy December night long ago. The legacy they built was not measured merely in acres or cattle, but in lives changed by simple acts of compassion, a legacy that would endure long after they were gone, carried forward by children who had learned that family is created through love, not just blood, and that everyone deserves a place to call home.